Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome everyone to Keynote 2, the age of big Earth observation data, challenges and possibilities. I'm Marcelo Nery. I'm the coordinator of technology transfer at the Center for Study of Violence, NEV in Portuguese, of the University of São Paulo, and I'm a collaborating researcher at the Institute of Advanced Studies Global Seeds Program. Here with me today is the Professor Dr. Gilberto Câmara. Gilberto Câmara was INPE's Assistant Director for the Earth Observation for October 2001 to December 2005, and INPE's Director General from December 2005 to May 2012. INPE, acronym in Portuguese, is National Institute for Space Research from Brazil. Under his guidance, INPE's team achieved big advances in land change monitoring using remote sense, leading to a major decrease in the deforestation in Amazonia. He received the 2012 William T. Pecora Award from USGS and NASA for leadership to the broad and open access to remote sensing data. Since then, he intends to build on his vision on open knowledge to help developing nations to best use the Earth observation data for improving societal well-being and sustainable development practices. From June 2013 to May 2015, he was the Brazil chair at the Institute for Geoinformatics at the University of Münster, Germany. From 2015 to 2018, he represents the São Paulo Research Foundation, FAPESP in Portuguese, in the Belmont Forum of Funding Agencies for Global Change Research, and was one of the co-chairs of the Belmont Forum 2016-2017. Gilberto led the Brazilian team, which, working together with researchers from IIASI, International Institute for Applied System Analysis, developed the technical studies that support the land use component of Brazil's National Determined Contribution, NDC, to the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. As recognition for his work, he was inducted as Doctor Honoris Causa from the University of Münster, Germany, and has a Chevalier Knight of the Ordre National du Mérite of France, between other recognitions. The Professor Gilberto has advised more than 20 PhD dissertations and more than 30 master theses, and publishes more than 300 scholar papers that have been cited more than 50,000 times. He is a Brazilian researcher in geoinformatics, spatial analysis, land use change, and Earth observation. And he is internationally recognized to promoting free access for geospatial data. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Gilberto, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. Thank you, Freya. Thank you for attending. Good. So many thanks to the organizers, to the local organizers in USP, and also from the organizers at TU Berlin, the AD, and University of Botswana, and all the other organizers. My talk today, I was invited kindly by Marcelo and Freya to talk about the issues of big Earth observation data, which and how do they intersect with the work in urban sustainability and sustainability in general. Well, the first important point here is what is the value of Earth observation? In what context are we working with? So the first point is that it is objective information, not in the sense that it's good or bad. It's in the sense that it measures values in terms of responses from the Earth to the solar radiation and transform them into images. The fact that it's mostly obtained by satellites means that it covers inaccessible areas, like Brazilian Amazon, for example, or the Congo Basin, or the world's tropical forest and the world's, for example, polar regions. And it is available on near real time. So the satellites are passing and you have the information. And also that you have a historical record. So satellites have been obtained images for now 50 years. There's a historical record. And so these are two, does look like they're different areas, but actually they're the same area in the Amazon forest in Rondônia captured within a 20-year span. And you can see the enormous difference in terms of occupation and land grabbing and deforestation that has taken place. The background for the use of Earth observations in all applications, but of course, in relation to the overall goals of research in social science and humanities, goes down to Rio Principle 10 or Rio 92 Declaration, which is a very important principle which states about the environmental issues are best handled with the participation of all citizens. Each individual shall have appropriate access to information concerning the environment. This is a key point because this is where the individuals have understanding of what's happening to their environment. So this principle underpins a lot of what we're doing. And of course, now that we are living in interesting times, as my friends from China would say, because we are asking ourselves the question about how is the Earth's environment changing and what are the consequences for our civilization. Everybody is concerned in one more ways or the other, or at least every concerned citizen should be concerned, put it that way. Of course, then the question brings up other questions. Some of the questions including, where are the changes taking place? Where? How much change is happening? And who is being impacted by the change? So these are questions that have to do with geospatial location, temporal location, and of course, attribution and humans being understood as being actors of their own destiny, but also being located in places, which brings back to the value of Earth observations in answering and helping answer. Let me put it this way, they don't answer, they help answer questions of how much, who, where, when. So these are important questions, and this is basically for your information, that's the deforestation of Amazonia map, which is produced by my institute, the National Institute of Space Research in Brazil, containing detailed information. This data set has been produced since 1988. So we have 34 years of continuous data being produced about the changes in Amazon. The other relevant point for a global conference is the fact that many data providers, including Europe, the United States, and Brazil, make their satellite data openly accessible. So the idea of an open data policy for satellite data is something recent, is from the last decade. Up to 2008, no data was available or were available at a cost, even public data. Nowadays, we have about 13, 15 terabytes per day of satellite data being made available, including, for example, the work by the European Commission and the European Space Agency, who has the largest civilian public satellite program on Earth, with lots of satellites for meteorology, for land, for the oceans, for the Arctic, for the planet's biomass, for the ocean salinity in the oceans, and so on. So we are capable of having more data now than we ever had before, which is a good thing because the challenges that we're facing are global. The chance of tipping points is real, and we really need a lot of data to work with that. Now, the point here is the issue of images. So we are accustomed to think about images from our mindsets of photographs, like freezing a moment in time. But in fact, when you have data over the same place, recurring data, there's another perspective that can be borne out of satellite and Earth observation images. And this is an image particularly relevant because that's the ROC in Kazakhstan. And this is different images of the same area in time, showing the salinization of the ROC. This was a project to use water from the ROC for farming in old Soviet times, who led to one of the major ecological catastrophes in our time, which is basically the demise of the ROC. And this, let's say, some time ago, I wrote a paper about that we should not view images as simply snapshots and freezing in time, but rather measurements that capture change. So the idea is to what we wrote, the focus of the ontological characterization of images should be searching for changes instead of searching for content. So from the methodological point of view, I'm not going to talk a lot about methods, but I'm just going to say that the fact that now a lot of the data, including historical data, is available, makes us possible to rethink the ways we do analysis in data. And normally, some of those who use maps and data actually forget about time. Essentially, sometimes you say, well, I have the data for 2020, and everything happens inside that time framework. And that's all well, and that's normal when you have like census data, which you have every 10 years or even more with a greater separation in time. When you have data which is like daily or every 3 days or 5 days, as is the case now, you are beginning to think about time in space in a different way. And so the old idea was what I do space first. You classify images or maps and you compare changes in time. But when you have continuous data, it's like let's say, the stock exchange or the temperature. You actually work with time series. So I'm not going to go into much detail here because I don't think it's the case, but I'm just going to note that the fact that we're dealing with lots of data makes the work in time series feasible for studying changes in Earth observation data. And that is perhaps one of the latest relevant trends for methodological analysis in such data. But let's go back to the mindset that is happening after the data became public. So this actually follows from a bigger, and I would argue, double-sided situation where we are calling the new digital economy. And the new digital economy is the one that you have big data being produced with a low access cost. in public APIs and massive use, with all the consequences that you're obviously familiar with. And the same holds for satellite data. Now the sources of the data are in the cloud. So the sources of the data being in the cloud means that in one hand, you can use the cloud to process the data and limit to zero or to very few the downloads of the data that you have to your own machine. So this used not to be the case. The case was that you would buy an image and you get this image and you analyze this image in your machine, but this is no longer the case. Now you have the truckload of 30 years of data in the cloud. It makes no sense downloading that to your machine. It makes sense working there. And because of so much data, there is a trend about not only doing statistical work, which is typically of let's say, geography or space geography, but using machine learning. And this is also a very recent trend for doing machine learning, for working with the whole data set of Earth observation. But as in any endeavor that has to do with AI, this kind of work can be done, but has to be taken with a grain of salt. There are many of those that are caught in the hype of artificial intelligence and say, well, it works for cats and dogs, so it's going to work for people, it's going to work for satellite images, it's going to work for the environment. And I'm going to argue that's not the case. And because big data has not solved the problem that, like the Americans say, there is an elephant in the room. In this case, there is a real elephant in the room. And of course, you have the African savannas and the fact that there are big animals in the African savannas. And by the way, there are no big animals in the Brazilian savannas. Although from the climatic point of view and the vegetation point of view, they share similarities. It is a long story about why is that so, but it doesn't matter. It matters that each of the ecosystem has its own story, has its own understanding. So my experience with using machine learning for understanding land change, which is my field, shows that ecosystems are highly variable, and trends to produce global data from, let's say, a place on Earth in the north about the whole global south is actually leading to misplaced results. Because if you don't use local knowledge, you're going to end up with nice maps that you put on the wall, but with little relevance for actual policy decisions. Not that does not have relevance, because in principle, if we consider the SDGs, there are many SDGs which can benefit from the use of Earth observation. Not, for example, protected areas, forest areas, a terrestrial freshwater biodiversity, population that has access to transport, consumption rate of consumption, land consumption with population growth, proportion of land that is degraded, coverage of protected areas for biodiversity, agricultural area under sustainable agriculture, and so on. Rural population would live within 2 kilometers an all-season road. Build up with cities that is open space for public use. All of these are, as you probably are most aware, make part of the tiers of indicators for the SDGs, and Earth observation can make a definite contribution to the SDGs by providing information which is crucial for this kind of application. Another one, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, is the gridded population. And it's very common that we work with census tract, but then we can have satellite images on top of the census tract. And now we can disaggregate the census tract in a much better way than we can understand within the census tract what is the population distribution. So a lot of work has recently gone into global data sets and local data sets of population distribution. And there is a huge effort going on. And this goes back to the 80s with work people like Valdo Tobler and Diana Lieberman, which talking about people in pixels. Now there are groups, and there's World Pop in Southampton, Season at Columbia, Grid 3, which is another organization, and then there's a collaboration called PopGrid. And they are producing actually visualizations of, for example, degree of urbanization. That's produced by the European Commission. Landscan, I think it's Woods Hole, and VERS is probably from Colombia. World Settlement, I think it's Colombia. So these are all data sets that help understanding the cities, and they are based on different approaches which complement each other. And they have been applied to kinds of mapping population, spatial demographics, including COVID. And okay, I was saying about the applications of population grids are significant in terms of spatial demographic and mapping populations. And there's, of course, World Pop, PopGrid effort should be also interesting for you. There's a lot of methods and lots of methods for doing that. Oops. For example, for creation population grids, and there's lots of research on this, including groups in Brazil. There's a group of INPE that works with this. My colleague Miguel Monteiro is working with that. Marcelo knows well. So this is another work, and there is we're gonna share the slides. So I'm pointing you to the recent paper by Stefan Leik and from Boulder, and also people from Colombia and different groups and JRC about what is the current state of large grid populations. Unfortunately, or fortunately, at least from the terms, what is actually coming as state of the art is commercial, because this is a company called Ecopia who is actually using very, very high resolution, talking about 20 centimeter, 50 centimeter resolution data from these satellites to produce high state-of-the-art infrastructure maps. And they're doing this, of course, and again, the problem here is that this data is not openly available, only partially openly available. It's becoming like an industry, although I am going to argue this is should be a public good. But in any case, the fact that now you can use high resolution data to produce high quality maps, including, and perhaps that's more relevant, for areas where you have actually very little information from census. For example, this is a work done by Ecopia and Marxa in Congo, where you can understand in a much better way than it would be possible with other kinds of data, what are the building footprints, including small buildings, small holders. And this is a quite important work. So far, it reveals information about population and urban settlements, which is very hard to obtain otherwise. And to highlight the relevance of high resolution data, I'm comparing here 4 data sets. This is the Landsat 30-meter data, so open data. This is the Sentinel 10-meter data. This is CBUS 8-meter data, and this is CBUS 2-meter data. And fortunately for Brazil, for those of you who are Brazilian researchers, you have access to the high resolution 2-meter data from CBUS 2A, which is open in Brazil. This is near the Furnas Reservoir. This is, I think, Guapé. So in that sense, this data is available for urban studies and downloadable from INPE's website, and you can access it. So this is the kind of data which I think should be widespread available globally. It's only that many countries still consider this commercial and make this available only at a cost. So to wrap up, what is happening in the area? First of all, I'm going to argue that it used to be the case that for working with Earth observations, one had to do a substantial effort in investment, including things like hardware, which is a problem everywhere. Having computers, and especially when you have servers with large data sets, is a cost. It's a cost, it's a burden to maintain, and so on. So in principle, data which is on the cloud should be easier to work with, and transforming the needs of those who want to work with big data more simply in a problem of mindware, not of a problem of hardware. The other data which I think is relevant is the fact that the world is becoming more educated. This is data from the World Bank talking about enrollment rate in tertiary education, which shows that, of course, you still have North America with like 80%, that's in Europe and Central Asia with 60%, but even the Caribbean and Latin America reaching something like 45% of enrollment rate over, this is enrollment age over the cohort, which is, let's say, of the university age and tertiary education age. And notice the growth in East Asia, that's China and Japan, Korea, of course, Middle East, South Asia, which is India, Sub-Saharan Africa, even it's growing slowly, but it's growing. But you see, everywhere you look, you have more people going into higher levels of education. And this is, of course, opens the box for sharing, opens the box for thinking open science in a really unprecedented way. And why is this important? Not only because knowledge should be shared as a principle, but also because we are trying to deal with information that is ultimately meant for policy making. If it's ultimately meant for policy making, there is a keyword which should be attached to each document which is done for policy making, and that word is trust. Do you trust the data? Do the policymaker trust the one that produces the data? And this is, for those of you who have been to Paris, you may notice, I don't know if this actually, you notice the chain locks, and everyone that goes to Paris with his girl or his boy, or whatever, his partner, would put a chain lock and put it there on the bridge. And of course, some of the chain locks last longer than the lock that led to them, but that's another story. But in case, trust matters. So in terms of environmental information, this is currently the trust. I mean, the data is becoming public, the data is becoming open, but it does not by itself, data doesn't talk. So the issues of co-design and co-production come into first and foremost, because in the end, co-design and co-production are the only way to achieve trust in our information about the environment. Going back to the first slide I showed on real principle thin, how does the community can trust what information they receive about the environment? So again, of course, there are very good efforts of building global maps and global information. Yes, they're fine, but they're not necessarily, and many times they're not to be trusted, because they're not built with the participation of those who are directly involved in the problem and in the decisions. So I'm going to skip a little bit and try to reach the end. Well, so the point being here is that I would argue that Earth observation by its nature should be a public good. This is something that is, of course, taken now in many cases, like the European satellites and the American satellites and Brazilian satellites, but of course is not adopted worldwide and not adopted for all kinds of data, of geographical data, and sociological data. But any of you, and I hope most of you who work with this would know that this is good that only becomes better with use. In fact, that's the old story. Value of such data comes from use, because they are non-rival in principle. You can use them and they don't wear out. You don't eat the cake. You actually, the cake continues to be there. And therefore, they have a lot of conditions to be treated as public goods. So it doesn't pay to, of course, we can expect that this would develop in the long run. One of the possible avenues in the long run is, of course, the one some of us are working for, is a world of shared knowledge, which basically means there is data. The data should be in cloud platforms. It should be open. One should share knowledge for that work with everyone as an open science way. This is the only way we are going to build empowered institutions. Empower those who are close to and have access to the decision makers in the countries, in the places. And those are the only ones who have a chance of influences to good decisions. As we know, co-design and co-production are our only way forward in producing information which is trusted by decision makers. And therefore, in this respect, maintaining open data and open knowledge is key to empowering institutions. And this is actually a part of a bigger dilemma, which I'm sure all of you are involved in, which is the digital commons. Our generation we are probably the last generation which was, let's say, using a physical telephone to telephone, the physical thing that you put open, pick up in your hand and dial. We did this. Our kids do not do it, and our grandsons will never know that it happened. I thought my example some years before was vinyl. I had a huge collection of rock and roll vinyl discs, and I gave them all away. And now I know how stupid I was, because vinyl is coming back. And the book is still there. But CDs and of course, film, cameras, the traditional cameras with film, they're gone. So we are undergoing a digital transition. The digital transition is felt in many places and not felt in others. Governance and citizen access is still a problem. The private sector has been tremendously active, Schumpeterianly active in doing this. And the government is still step by step moving, but as we saw in the discussion of the election in Brazil with the electronic urn, we still have a lot, electronic voting machine, we still have a lot to go in this. But the long run, the digital commons, the data will be completely digital. Maps will be completely digital, information about census is digital, and so on. And therefore, this transition has to be undertaken with an open view, with an open knowledge, with empowering institutions, with support for better government, not replacing government by Facebook. So with that, I thank you very much. And I think I followed my time. which give you time for discussions. And my appreciation again goes to those that invited me and those who had the patience to follow this lecture. Thank you so much.
Great, fantastic. So we don't have much time. Questions? Someone? Freya?
Yeah, Gilberto, many thanks for this thrilling presentation. And I was actually wondering how, if you could tell us a little bit about how this kind of rationale you've been developing regarding this common access and so on of these data, how has been the repercussion, the impact, the international impact of this kind of idea? How would you locate your own way of addressing this issue in the international debate? Marcelo mentioned in his presentation that you are very well not only networked, but that you are really having an influence in these international forums. I would like to actually address the specificity of your contribution to this international debate. If you could dwell a little bit on that, that would be nice.
Okay.
Thanks.
So I was for 3 years, from 2018 to 2021, director of the UN, well, it's an intergovernmental organization linked to the United Nations called GEO, Group on Earth Observation. So I was director of the secretariat. And I had to fight a lot because the problem is contradictions. So the issue is very much contradictory in the sense that developing countries very clearly understood the need to have open data and open science. You had, and the North in the North, it's interesting because you take the United States. The United States has a culture of what all public data is available for free. They cannot even be copyrighted, data from the census and so on. However, it does not have a strong culture in terms of its own public sector using the data. So a lot of that public data is actually used by private companies. On the other hand, the Europeans, who are very strong in their, state sector, still have produced data, but still they have this idea of supporting their industry. So there is a contradiction there, which sits uneasily. It's a fight inside Europe, and a fight, of course, with Europe versus the other world, insofar as they would like their industry to provide services using geospatial data to the developing world, which is actually, again, I had huge fights with the Europeans because I told them your data is very good, but you cannot claim that you're going to do mapping for Brazil. I'm sorry, it's the Brazilians who are going to go mapping for Brazil, or you're not going to go to measure the coffee in Vietnam. It's the Vietnamese are going to do that. Come on, stop this nonsense. And then, of course, it was a huge fight. And so the fight but again, the point, of course, is that the worst situation is with countries where the state is so powerful that it completely freezes the possibility of debate on this matter. And even people who are, what countries I'm talking about, I'm not going. I think you would understand that many countries with very strong autocratic traditions have to have control over data. And that's the worst, because they are the ones who sit on top of lots of data. They're the ones who actually don't take any steps. And there's the ones who you can not even have a dialogue. So I'm going to argue that, but the debate on Africa, the debate on South America, the debate on South Asia, it's open in the sense that there is a possibility of very young researchers coming out of age now, right now, to be able to use these open data sets for good purposes. Thank you.
Great. And Nina Bauer?
I also have a follow-up question also on what you said about European countries. And could you elaborate a little more about another issue? Because the real issue, at least in Germany, is that open data always, it's not so much about data privacy of companies, but more of users. Also against our backdrop that the National Socialists used all types of geographical data for doing spatial profiling and using it to efficiently organize, to identify people to kill off and actually killing them. So one of the big issues is what to do with concerning data privacy if you do data open, which is a huge drawback. Just giving you an example is like, concerning COVID in Germany, all the apps we've been using for digital tracing, which would have made a lot of sense, have been basically rendered useless for data privacy reasons. And it doesn't really help that there's always the impression that other countries don't seem to take that so seriously. So could you elaborate a little more about that and how this is affecting the use of geographical data? And if you have any ideas how to handle this issue.
Vielen Dank für Ihre Frage. I was a professor at the University of Münster for 2 years in the Institute of Geoinformatics. We used to teach German students examples from the Brazilian census because they didn't have access to examples from the German census. So to teach them things about population grids and spatial analysis, we actually use the Brazilian census because I'm going to argue that from a sustainable development perspective, there is a problem with privacy. You cannot have both in a world because you cannot protect fully privacy of individuals in a world of where regulation will take place, unless everybody swears to his favorite God to be sustainably development. The only way we can bring about sustainable development is by some form of regulation, stronger or weaker, because the problems are deep enough in terms of who consumes more, who should be targeted for reducing energy consumption and so on. So I understand, and I lived in Germany, and I understand the German concerns about the Nazis. But the problem is, think of the following, Nina. In Brazil, okay, we have a huge problem with deforestation. And without attribution, in other words, without being able, and the data on the properties in terms of the land register, cadastre, is open. And it has to be open because you need to attribute who actually did that deforestation. So without, and I understand that they could never do it in Germany, and that therefore they could never fight deforestation in Germany, thanks that Germany is not responsible for the Amazon. So the problem here, I'm going to argue on the Leviathan standpoint of someone who is actually involved. Just for your background, I was very involved in the effort of reducing deforestation in Amazonia from 27,000 square kilometers in 2004 to 4,000 kilometers in 2012. And don't think we operated the miracle of conversion. There was no miracle of conversion of the guys. It was hard, Leviathan, Hobbesian state, picking the guys, burning trucks, burning equipment, putting people in jail. So there is, I don't, and if we are going to promote my argument is sustainable development is not for the faint-hearted. It's not because people are going to be convinced that it's good. It's a Hobbesian task of regulation and law enforcement to force those that consume today to restrain their consumption of the natural resources for the benefit of the generations that they will come. And I don't know of any example in human endeavor where that has taken place by volition and by acceptance. So therefore, again, I repeat, it's a good thing that Germany is not in charge of the Amazon, because we would never be able to fight deforestation in the Amazon with the German privacy laws. Simple as that.
I'm sorry, I have to add up. First of all, let me point this out. It's like, if you have been in computer sciences, like you could never have done what you did in computer sciences and the social sciences because the protocol, and there's actually a big infight because computer scientists in Germany are never taking this seriously exactly with the arguments you're having. But the actual issue, I mean, fair enough, if Brazilians decide they want to disclose this, but who gets to actually to decide when, which type of data are going to use, because the way we teach it in Germany, that it's always a long contrast between different ethical principles. And the main drawback is actually both international companies and foreign governments deciding for German citizenships on Germany for doing that, which is why I wouldn't have an issue if Brazilians decide it's fair enough. But on a global scale, when we're talking about this global the sustainability, when we're talking about is how we're going to handle these ethical balances and how we're going to address them. I'm sorry I'm talking about this, but this is exactly when we're talking about localizing. These are issues we have to talk about it, and it doesn't help replacing sort of one government which is in power now, or a company deciding it now, or deciding for someone else, and replacing this.
And I think this is a matter of principle debate. My first arguments, no one gets to decide if the data is transparent and open. That's my point. The problem here is there is a fundamental point here. If data is open and transparent, no one gets to decide whether that data should be released or not. It's a principle. And again, it's completely compatible with Rio Principle 10. The problem of asking who gets to decide is back to the Romans. Who guards the guardian? This goes back to Roman times, onto classical times. If you entrust a certain guardian with the role of deciding who is to be trusted, who can trust the guardian? The point is, when the data is completely open, there is no guardian. And yeah, I'm going to argue the issue about the power of the private companies is only as great as the lack of power in the government. And if there is one thing I've learned over working with this kind of thing, is that government should have power, should have been empowered, should have capabilities of doing what the private industry does and better. And that's what we achieved here with. So I'm going to argue, I'm not going to convince you, and that's not my point. What I said is that the German approach would not have worked in Brazil, and I maintain my point. And I'm not trying to reform Germany. I'm just trying to keep Brazil with a transparent data set as we have it. Esteban has a question.
Esteban Perez, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the interesting presentation. I just wanted to take back on this point of the trust that you mentioned, which might be well connected to what we have been discussing so far. But I think it's a quite important, it's actually more important to mention this in the Latin American context, because at least in Argentina, where I'm from, for example, the INDEC, which is the national census, the National Institute of Statistics and Censuses, there was quite a debate about the legitimacy of the data. And because of this lack of transparency, it was very questioned to the point that the public, so the people were actually not believing the numbers that were being published. So I was, maybe there is not answer, but I think it's maybe it's important to bring this, to the question to how to gain trust, because I think in the Latin American context, this is something very important. Maybe is that the same in Brazil? And maybe that's a question that I would have for that. So,
okay. Well, of course, it's the same everywhere. I'm not saying it's the same in Brazil. It's not. It's even not even Latin America. It's the issue worldwide. How do you trust the institutions? Again, my point is if you look in science, why do we trust COVID vaccine? Let's go back to the scientific view, which has taken out of the caves and put us in the moon. Okay, so how do you trust science? How do you trust when people say it's going to go climate change and it's going to have tipping points? What is the key here? The key has always been that you don't trust what has not been peer reviewed. You don't trust data which is not published. You would not take a vaccine without a lot of data that underpins the clinical exams. So my point about geospatial data is actually the same. My point is, you will not trust the guy who did it. You trust your ability to verify the data that he has produced. In the same thing as COVID, in the same thing that you trust medicines, or you trust the fact that the GPS tells you the place that you are, or that's going to have a climate change. And so my point is data production should be seen as a scientific endeavor. And the data producers should be subject to the same kind of scrutiny that you would scrutinize the COVID vaccine. And if they are not transparent in the way you require for medicines, then you're taking the wrong policy. It's like the wrong medicine. So the point here is that in many countries, many countries, most countries, a lot of statistical and geospatial data production institutions are not fully equipped with the kind of mindset and protection that is afforded to scientists in terms of publication. And you may know or may not know that my successor at INPE had to leave the post because the government mistrusted the data. But the fact that he came out fighting because he was a scientist actually reduced the government's power to mess with the data. And the fact that people think scientifically in the sense that they serve the state and they serve science before serving a government is the only way. I'm not saying this is, my sense is there's no alternative as shown by the evolution of humanity. You don't trust the data, you trust your ability to check the data. Prior.
Thanks, Gilberto, and also thanks, Nina, thanks, Esteban. I think this is a very important discussion we are having now for a global center of spatial methods for urban sustainability. Because what I think the point Nina made and your point, what they, in my opinion, actually express is really this difficulty of coping with the issue of privacy given the local specificities in the global north and global south and so on. But in my opinion, what I would like to address here as a third position is that I think it depends a lot on the data. I think this is the discussion we would have to make. I don't imagine, Gilberto, that you are proposing that let's open all the data irrespectively of your intimacy will be accessible to anyone. I don't think you are saying that. I think you are actually, and I think this is the discussion we have to have, and I would like to ask you if there is something going on in that direction, on a kind of protocol of socially important data, because I think what you are bringing here into the discussion, Gilberto, is really the issue of this social inequality, social data inequality at the end of the day, because we in like let's say now Brazil, the global north wants to keeps the data, knowledge at the end of the day. This is exactly what Nina showed yesterday in our opening lecture. The role of knowledge as power. No? This is something typical of modernity. No? And obviously, the global north is very, very, very aware of the power of knowledge, and the problem is they have the power, they have the knowledge on us, and aren't we able to have our own power over the knowledge we may produce? So in my opinion, I think we have to include into this discussion a kind of protocol about the socially relevant data. And I'm just quickly recalling a very important issue that appears in our Constitution of 1988, which is, for example, regarding urban land, the social role of property. Yeah. So if there is, like you said, Gilberto, you said, look, if we didn't have the access to the properties in the Amazon to find out who is actually deforesting, we could not intervene. Yes. So the issue is, so should we have access to this kind of data? Who is the owner of the land? For us to be able to address this issue, I think this is a necessity in a country and in a world like the one in which we are, where the Amazon is being deforested. Yes. So and I'm actually, just to make a kind of polemic regarding Nina, I've just come back from Germany, and I was in Berlin, and I had a very interesting tour with students from the TU Berlin some weeks ago. They led us to the eastern part of Berlin, and wanted to explain the issue of the difficulty, who owns the land in Berlin. And they told us there during this presentation that they had an immense difficulty in getting to know who is the owner of the land of Berlin, who are the companies who own, and so on. Yeah? These data are restricted. So as we see, I think we should discuss which kind of data. Privacy is not only privacy in general, because I totally understand Nina's point about nazism and so on, but I think we should have this kind of discussion of the social, the social value of the issues, for example, of urban sustainability goals and their relation to data access. Okay, this is just a reflection on this issue.
Okay.
Don't know what you think.
Das ist kein politische Naivität. Das ist Realität, Nina. You want the Amazon to burn, Nina? That's my point.
No,
you call me a politically naive person.
You
call me a politically naive person. Okay, you want the Amazon to burn. That's what you want.
No, but I also don't want to be filmed in my private rooms with hardware set I was never asked to have, and this couldn't be on the internet. And I've seen this being called for when we're talking about the open access data. And I've been in projects. I'm a technical university, and there's a lot of engineers building exactly on these things, and it's not such an easy thing. So this is sort of politically, I think it's not easy. By the way, I do agree that I think we're in on this, that company ownership data and the like should be public, but I don't want my personal move profiles to be public.
But I take offense from the fact that you call me politically naive. I'm very proud of having a very important role in Brazil and otherwise in obtaining results. I think call people politically naive is really a culture of cancellation, which I think it's not proper. Because the point here is the following: how do you achieve results? How do you move policy? What you may know or may not know, that the Europeans, the first person who put the Earth observation data online is yours truly. I did it in 2005. And I went around the world telling the Europeans that they should do the same. And I was in many meetings, international meetings. Finally, they did it. So why should I bow to the Europeans when we led the way? I think this is, I mean, to call someone politically naive just because he's I am an engineer and I'm proud of it. But in my work in politics, what I always try to look for is how do you achieve results? The point here, I agree with going back to Freya. This is an open debate. This is a serious debate. And this is a debate where people get on heated arguments. You should not, my only point is, you should not look from the perspective of the above, like the humanities being in general smarter and more savvy than the engineers, because the always engineer. No, I think there has to be, and we're not. The last thing I would be accepted to be called, given the results we obtain in Brazil, is to be politically naive. I'm sorry, this is quite offensive, and I think if I had done this to you, you would not like it.
I apologize for this, but I have to say I take offense if someone says, well, in a country where individual data available on data which were geographically referenced was used for killing people, saying, well, someone has to do this because otherwise you won't solve the sustainable goals. I think there has to be, I think agree with Freya, it's an important debate, but we have to look at what kind of data. Actually, I frankly do think that the data you were talking about are not sensitive at all. And I would absolutely agree that all of those should be available. But on the other hand, I've just been in several projects where in technology there is privacy data are built, and we're having at the same time discussions about open access where people discussing about putting these data openly in the internet. And I personally, there might be reasons for doing that, but I would like to have a public debate which is a little more refined on, instead of going on in sense of progress, we have to put all this data open. So I think it is like depending on sometimes really complex, which is frankly, I'm sorry I called you, but I really have to say I take offense about suggesting that data privacy is inhibiting progress.
No, okay, I think we can leave it at that, and I respect very much. I mean, I had a wonderful time in Germany, okay? I love Germany. I'm sorry I don't speak German fluently, but I can at least read it. So I am, but the point, and I respect why the Germans are what they are, but to take Freya's point, I understand that it's very good that we've reached an issue where we can agree that there's a need for a strong debate, and where positions have to be understood. My final point, Nina, is that if we had not put the data openly, who would know what's happening in the Amazon? Okay, would you allow me, since you call me politically naive, to tell you a story, and I'll finish with that, and I'll take off and ask Marcelo 2 minutes to tell a story. Do you have an idea what happened to get the data on the Amazon open and free for everyone to see? Do you have an idea what it took? Okay, let me tell you how it happened. In 2003, the new government was in 2000. In the 2000, I tried to put the data on the web, and I was blocked by the Ministry of Science and Technology at the time, Cardoso administration. So in 2002, there was a change in government. So I talked to my friend Marina Silva, who you may know was a Minister of the Environment, and I told Marina, next time I'm not going to ask anyone. So in 2003, early 2003, all the ministers were new. We had a cabinet meeting that everyone, like 8 ministers were present, but the president. And I was going to present the data on Amazon deforestation. And I called Marina and said, Marina, she was the Minister for the Environment. I said, Marina, okay, tomorrow I'm going to put the data free. if they cut me, will you give me a place in your, you bury me with honors? She said, okay. So after the meeting I presented, there were like 8 or 9 ministers present. I simply said, and tomorrow, because of the new policies of the Lula government, the data of the Amazon deforestation will be in the internet. All the ministers were there. They had no idea what they meant. Everybody agreed. There was never a single piece of paper signed by anyone authorizing that. It took courage, not naivety, to make the data available. You have no idea how is it to make data public in Brazil and make data responsible in Brazil. Thank you very much.
And
So
I have to
I'm sorry, Nina, even I have more time. I'm sorry. Sorry.
Marcelo, let her please answer. She was talking to her.
I'm really sorry, Gilberto, I do apologize. I take it back. Let's put it this as a way of scientific debate that I'm allowed in the true academic discourse to revise my my argument. However, I would appreciate at some time to the whole audience we start discussing about the ethical issues resulted with this, because I think this is actually the real problem about it, that there is no one true way. And it would be interesting about how to handle these cultural differences and balancing this thing out. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. At least we had a debate. That's what Marcelo and Freya wanted, okay?
Exactly. I think this was a wonderful discussion, because I think this is exactly the point we should address in a methodological conference like this on urban sustainability. Marcelo, it's a difficult role, Marcelo. Do you see?
Be careful what you wish for.
Okay, I'm so sorry we have time. So I need to breathe.
No, I just wanted to mention here that Athena, don't you want to say anything? Because you say, I think, I'm sorry, but I think it's such a unique opportunity. Athena, you have written something here. Do you want to say what you've written?
Yeah.
Please.
I was born in a country like everyone expected to expose themselves to the whole village. Like any neighbor can enter our house anytime, go into the bedroom, seeing everything. So I used to feel very safe and very comfortable in that country. I didn't find any problem until recently I heard about the term privacy, which even newly translated into Vietnamese. I didn't understand that. Recently, in villages like where I am living now, people still keep the culture of helping each other. So they are like, as long as the purpose is to protect like women from being attacked or to discover who was a criminal attacking some houses, then everyone are okay to expose the camera anyway all over the village. But recently, the culture is not as strong as before. So women often feel less safe when they walk home late. Like I myself suffer from a rape attack last year. Luckily, the culture was still strong. So all the neighbors, they opened the camera, exposing everything, and the police caught the criminal in about 1 hour. I think that if the purpose is for something better, then the community can think of sacrificing, and that until now that's the only way.
Wonderful. I think this is really that's I think what we are bringing, and also Gilberto with the issue of the courage. I think Nina, this is really something we when we live in the global south. I always remind or recall Claude Lévi-Strauss' book, O cru e o cozido, the crude and the what is cooked. And he used this idea of really raw and crude to talk about South American myths, and the cooked is something from the global north. So, as it were, life is a little bit easier. So we are forced to have this kind of Gilberto said, this kind of courage to do things that that obviously in civilization terms may seem a little bit, my God, how horrible, but and I think Athena's testifying here, his testimony here is very interesting for us to see that. I think it depends on the data, and this is the discussion I think we would have to have about the protocol of the social role of the data. Yeah, and Nina, I don't know whether you want to say anything else, and Marcelo is becoming totally crazy, and this is life.
Thank you.
So this is the end, Gilberto. Please.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good morning,
Good night.
good afternoon, good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.